In this video, we're going to be discussing something called collision theory. The concept is not real tough. The math that falls out of it might be a little complicated, but that's okay. The idea is that if you have molecules and there is a reaction, there has to be some sort of interaction between them. And honestly, what has to happen is they have to collide. They have to interact strong enough to overcome the intermolecular forces to like break bonds and form new bonds and such. Okay. But not all collisions result in a reaction. Okay, let me try to write some of that down. So, for a reaction to occur, a collision between molecules must occur. But not all collisions cause a reaction. Okay. The way we visualize this is we usually plot energy versus something called reaction progress. Basically just, you can basically visualize it as time, like how the reaction is occurring, okay? And the way most reactions work is you have the relative stability of these things tells you how high the energy is. So typically most reactions you have reactants, which are at some, which are at some energy level, and then you end up with products that tend to be more stable. That's not always the case, but it is usually the case. Okay, it's the most likely answer. Now the problem is, you would think that basically energy would be released. This would be an example of an exothermic reaction. Okay, basically the products are more stable than the reactants. But the problem is that because we have to account for the fact that there has to be a collision that results in enough energy to overcome to like break bonds and such, there's actually an energy barrier in between these two. And we usually represent it like this. I'm not sure I drew that well, but it'll work. Okay. So it turns out that the difference in height between the reactants and the products is essentially delta H for the reaction. Okay. If the products are lower in energy than the reactants, it is an exothermic reaction. This, as I'm drawing it, is an exothermic reaction, and exothermic reactions are more likely to be more likely to happen. If you had the products higher than the reactants, it would be an endothermic reaction. But either way, there's this mountain in the middle that you have to get over. Okay, I'm going to switch colors here. The difference between the reactants and the height, the highest part of the peak is something we're going to abbreviate as E sub A. E sub A is the activation energy. It's usually in joules or kilojoules, okay? But it's the energy barrier needed, like how much energy you have to put in to make those things collide to actually get a reaction to occur. There are some reactions that have very, very low activation energies. Like if you take gasoline and you set it on fire, the difference between the reactants and products, the products are significantly lower, and the amount of energy to get over this is really, really small. Like if you had a container of gasoline and you had a spark, it's enough to ignite it, okay? If you had like graphite and diamond is significantly more stable, but the activation energy is so exorbitantly high that it's going to almost make it impossible for the reaction to occur. Not technically impossible, just close enough. Okay. A couple other things to point out. I guess I'll keep switching colors here. It's possible to have multiple peaks. We'll worry about that later in this chapter. But the highest peak gets this little symbol. It's basically a vertical line it's like a equal sign with a vertical line through it. This is the technical term. Actually, if you look on like Microsoft Word and look up the symbols, if you find this one, it's called a double dagger. This symbolizes a transition state. And it is the least stable part of the process, which makes sense because it's the height of the highest peak. Okay, this is in between reactants and products, and you'll have things where you have like broken, like half broken bonds and half formed bonds. Like you don't even have like complete molecules at this point. So basically you go from reasonably stable reactants, and they react and they have to break apart and form new things. And there it goes through this like awkward, like half broken phase, and then it comes back down to forming products, which are more stable than the reactants in this particular case. Okay. So collision theory tells us basically it accounts for this activation energy. Some reactions require a lot of energy to make this, to get from reactants to products. The higher this activation energy is, the harder it is for the reaction to go, and probably the slower it's going to go, since we're talking about reaction speed here. Okay. As you guys might have expected, there's an equation for this. Okay, gets to be the trend around here. So, this equation will look really familiar. We haven't actually seen it, but it should look almost identical to a different equation that we saw a couple chapters ago. Okay? I don't even know the name of this reaction, or name of this equation, but that's okay. I guess in terms of pointing things out here, these are the K's, they're your rate law constants. And it depends on whether it's a first order, second order, third order as to what the units are going to be, but it's for the same reaction. So basically what we know is that K changes with temperature. So what we do is we measure the rate law constant at one temperature, and then we measure it again at a different temperature. And in this equation, we can solve for E sub A. Okay, so these are rate law constants at different temperatures. Okay, R is the same R we used in the last equation, 8.314 joules per mole Kelvin, and that is going to dictate what the units need to be. E sub A is activation energy, we just learned that one. And then these are the temperatures in Kelvin. Basically, R is going to decide what our units need to be, and this is Kelvin, so this has to be Kelvin. Okay. We have seen variations of this equation before. This shouldn't be anything too weird compared to what we've seen before. Last time we did this, the other version of this equation that we saw, we had two different pressures at different temperatures, and then we were solving for delta H of vaporization. This time, we're doing rate law constants at different temperatures and solving for activation energy. But it's kind of pretty similar. So let's try an example just so you have one in your notes. So the way this would work is all the steps you'd have to go through to solve for a rate law and solve for the rate law constant and all that stuff, you would have to do that twice. You'd have to do it at one temperature and then do it again at a different temperature. So you would have to be given a rate law. I'm just going to assume that somebody has gone through all the work and we know the answers, and this is what we got. So we have, so somebody who lives at 19.7 degrees Celsius, 25 is like room temperature, so a little bit cold, but not too bad. And they ran this reaction, and this is the rate law that they got. It's first order, which doesn't really matter for this, but it is. And this is the K value that we got. And then they ran the reaction again. So the general form of the reaction is going to be the same, still first order, but we're at a different temperature. So this is at 53.6 degrees Celsius. Okay, so we have two K values and two temperatures, and it doesn't matter which one's 1 and which one's 2 as long as you're consistent. I am, for the sake of convenience, going to call this call these ones 1 and this one 2. Okay. To convert from, we need this in Kelvin, so you add 273.15. So if you added 273.15 to this, the value you get is 292.85, and I guess technically that's where our sig figs end. And this, if you add 273.15, is 326.75 Kelvin. Okay? And so we want to know, what is the activation energy? can't spell, sorry. What is the activation energy for this reaction? So we need to solve for E sub A. I am actually going to rearrange the equation before I put all the numbers in. If you want to do it the other way, that's fine. It is what it is. So let me rewrite that equation so I can show all my work. Okay. So since we're solving for E sub A, we're going to just leave this as is on the left. We need to get rid of this R. We're going to multiply by R on both sides. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to both sides. So that's on the bottom here, so I put it on the top here to cancel it out, which leaves 1 over here on the top. We also need to get rid of this entire parenthesis, so I'm just going to divide the entire parenthesis on both sides. Which cancels all that out and cancels that out. So I'm going to put E sub A on the left, and then all of this stuff will be on the right. So E sub A is equal to R is on top, natural log of K2 over K1 is on top. All of that is divided by 1 over T1 minus 1 over T2. Okay. Well, we have all of those numbers, so we plug them in. R is a constant, it's 8.314 joules per mole Kelvin. Okay. Natural log of K2 over K1. We said that the second reaction is going to be our 2. Again, it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. So 6.21 times 10 to the negative third inverse seconds is on top, and 2.73 times 10 to the negative fourth inverse seconds is on bottom. The inverse seconds will immediately cancel out, so we can pretty much ignore them. Okay. All of this is going to be divided by 1 over T1, which was 292.85 Kelvin, minus 1 over T2, which is 326.75 Kelvin. Okay, plugging all of this in is going to be a pain, and we'll figure it out. Okay, so doing the top part, 8.314 times natural log of 6.21 EE negative 3 divided by 2.73 EE negative 4. If I hit equals, that gives me the top. The top is like, I don't know, 26. Okay? Divided by, I'm going to put it in parentheses, 1 divided by 292.85 minus 1 divided by 326.75. Okay? And I got a big answer of 73,312. Okay? I guess in terms of units, the kelvins cancel out because they're all 1 over kelvins. So we end up with joules per mole. So the final answer, E sub A, equals 73,323.6 blah, blah, blah. Okay? Doesn't really matter because we have to, 3 sig figs would be there. This is joules per mole. Most of the time, E sub A's and delta H's are all left in kilojoules. So this is basically 73.3 kilojoules per mole, which doesn't seem as unreasonable. Okay, so, but this equation is a mess, but it's not a mess we haven't seen before, honestly. It's pretty similar to stuff we did already. Okay, all right, thanks.